When we perform a hypothesis test, there's 4 possible outcomes that depend on the actual truth or falseness of the null hypothesis. So everything is based around the null hypothesis and the decision whether we're going to reject it or not. And if we look at this table, this summarizes the possible outcomes. So the 4 possible outcomes are: the decision is not to reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is true. So this would be a correct decision. Then the decision could also be to reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is true, and this would be an incorrect decision, and that's a type 1 error. Then we could have the decision is not to reject the null hypothesis when in fact the null hypothesis is false. So this is an incorrect decision, and it's a type 2 error. And then lastly is the decision to reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is false, and this is a correct decision whose probability is called the power of the test. So each of these errors occurs with a particular probability. There are Greek letters alpha and beta that represent the probabilities. Alpha represents the probability of a type 1 error, and that's the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is in fact true. And then beta is the probability of a type 2 error, which is when you have a probability of not rejecting the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is false. So alpha and beta should be as small as possible because they are probabilities of errors. They're rarely 0 though. And then the power of the test is 1 minus beta, and ideally we want a high power that is as close to 1 as possible. So increasing the sample size would be one way to increase the power of the test. Now I want to, in the next video, take a look at some examples of type 1 and type 2 errors.